The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty fields of Millbrook, a small town nestled in the heart of rural America. Amidst the swaying corn stalks and golden wheat, a lone figure toiled tirelessly, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. This was Jack Thornton, a humble farmer whose life was about to be turned upside down in ways he could never have imagined. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, his faded denim shirt clinging to his lean frame. At 35, he bore the marks of a life lived close to the earth, calloused hands, sun-weathered skin, and eyes that held both kindness and quiet determination. Despite the hardships he faced, there was always a gentle smile on his lips, a testament to his unwavering spirit. As he made his way back to the rickety farmhouse that had been in his family for generations, Jack's mind wandered to the upcoming town meeting. The elite of Millbrook, led by the wealthy landowner Victor Blackwell, had been pushing for a new development project that threatened to swallow up several small farms, including Jack's. He knew he had to attend, to stand up for his land and his way of life, even if it meant facing the scorn and ridicule of those who looked down on him. Little did Jack know that this meeting would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he knew about himself and the town he called home. The town hall was packed when Jack arrived, his work boots leaving faint traces of soil on the polished floor. He could feel the stares and hear the whispers as he made his way to an empty seat at the back. The air was thick with tension and the overpowering scent of expensive perfume. Victor Blackwell stood at the podium, his tailored suit a stark contrast to Jack's simple attire. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "progress waits for no one. Our little town of Millbrook is on the brink of a golden opportunity. The Blackwell Resort and Golf Course will put us on the map, bringing jobs and prosperity to all." Applause erupted from the crowd, but Jack noticed a few worried faces among the other farmers present. He took a deep breath and raised his hand. Victor's eyes narrowed as he spotted Jack. "Ah, Mr. Thornton. How kind of you to grace us with your earthy presence. Do you have something to contribute?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Jack. He stood, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. "Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your vision for Millbrook, but what about the farms that have been here for generations? My land, and the lands of my neighbors, they're not just dirt and crops. They're our heritage, our livelihood." A titter of laughter rippled through the crowd. Victor's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, Jack. Always living in the past. Don't you see? Your quaint little farm is holding this town back. It's time to step aside and let progress take its course." Jack tried to interject, but Victor waved his hand dismissively. "Perhaps if you had spent more time educating yourself instead of playing in the dirt, you'd understand the complexities of economic growth," Victor sneered. "Now, why don't you run along back to your corn stalks and leave the important decisions to those of us who know what's best for Millbrook?" The room erupted in cruel laughter. Jack felt his face burning with humiliation, but he stood his ground even as tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. He looked around, hoping to find a friendly face, but even those he considered friends averted their gaze. As Jack left the town hall, his shoulders slumped under the weight of defeat. He didn't notice the pair of eyes watching him with interest. Emily Carter, the town's librarian, had observed the entire exchange with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. There was something about Jack's quiet dignity in the face of such cruelty that stirred her heart. Unknown to both Jack and the townspeople, Emily held a secret that would soon shatter the very foundations of Millbrook's social hierarchy. The next few days were a blur of misery for Jack. News of his humiliation spread through the town like wildfire, and he found himself the subject of whispers and pointed fingers wherever he went. Even a simple trip to the general store became an ordeal. "Well, if it isn't the town fool," sneered Brad, Victor's son, as Jack entered the store. "Come to buy some books on farming for dummies?" Jack ignored the jibe, focusing on gathering the supplies he needed. But as he approached the counter, he overheard Mrs. Blackwell, Victor's wife, speaking in a stage whisper to her friend. "Can you believe the audacity? A simple farmer thinking he could stand up to Victor. It's almost pitiful, really. Some people just don't know their place in the world." Jack's hands trembled as he paid for his items, the coins clinking loudly in the sudden hush that fell over the store. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of his reflection in the window, a man beaten down but not broken, his eyes still holding a flicker of hope. That evening, as Jack sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, he was surprised to see a figure approaching his farm. It was Emily Carter, her arms full of books and a determined expression on her face. "Good evening, Jack," she said, a kind smile lighting up her features. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced." Jack stood, brushing off his pants. "Not at all, Miss Carter. What brings you out this way?" Emily's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I have something to show you, Jack. Something that could change everything." As they sat at Jack's worn kitchen table, Emily spread out a collection of old documents, their edges yellow with age. "I've been researching the history of Millbrook for a new exhibit at the library," she explained. "And I found something interesting about your land." Jack leaned in, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Emily pointed to a faded map. "According to these records, the original land grant for what is now Millbrook was given to your great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Thornton. He was the founder of this town, Jack. And there's more." She pulled out another document, this one bearing an official seal. "This is a covenant signed by Jeremiah. It states that the land now owned by the Blackwells was given in trust, to be used for the common good of all Millbrook's residents. If it's ever used for private gain, the ownership reverts to Jeremiah's heirs, which means you, Jack." Jack's head spun as he tried to process this information. "But how is this possible? Why didn't anyone know about this?" Emily's expression turned grim. "I have reason to believe that some people did know, Jack. People who had a vested interest in keeping this information buried." As the implications of Emily's discovery began to sink in, Jack felt a mix of emotions washing over him, shock, anger, and a growing sense of purpose. For the first time in days, he felt a spark of hope igniting in his chest. Little did Jack know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would test his resolve, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately lead him to discover strengths he never knew he possessed. As the sun set on Millbrook, casting long shadows across the farmland, the stage was set for a battle that would shake the very foundations of the town and change Jack's life forever. In the Blackwell mansion on the hill, Victor sat in his study, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. He gazed out the window at the twinkling lights of Millbrook below, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. Little did he know that his carefully constructed world of privilege and power was about to come crashing down around him. As night fell over Millbrook, the seeds of change had been planted. In the days to come, the town would witness a drama of epic proportions, a tale of long-buried secrets, unexpected alliances, and the triumph of the human spirit against overwhelming odds. For Jack Thornton, the humble farmer who had been laughed at by the town's elite, life was indeed about to turn upside down, in ways that would leave the entire community forever changed. The following morning dawned crisp and clear over Millbrook, but for Jack Thornton, the world seemed somehow different. The weight of Emily's revelation pressed upon him, a mixture of responsibility and possibility that both thrilled and terrified him. As he went about his morning chores, Jack's mind raced with questions. How could he use this information? Would anyone believe him? And most importantly, how would this change things between him and the townsfolk who had so cruelly laughed at him? Lost in thought, Jack almost didn't notice the sleek black car pulling up his dusty driveway. His heart sank as he recognized Victor Blackwell stepping out, his expensive leather shoes looking comically out of place among the chickens pecking at the ground. Jack, my good man. Victor called out, his voice dripping with false cheer. I hope I'm not interrupting your quaint morning rituals. Jack straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Mr. Blackwell. This is unexpected. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, I've been doing some thinking since our little chat at the town hall. Perhaps I was a bit hasty in dismissing your concerns. Jack raised an eyebrow, suspicion gnawing at him. Is that so? Indeed, Victor continued smoothly. In fact, I have a proposition for you. Why don't you come up to the house this evening? We can discuss your future and the future of your charming little farm. Before Jack could respond, Victor was already heading back to his car. 7 o'clock sharp, Jack. Don't be late. As the dust settled from Victor's departure, Emily's car pulled up. She jumped out, her face flushed with excitement. Jack! I've found something else. You won't believe, she stopped short, noticing Jack's troubled expression. What's wrong? Was that Victor Blackwell I just saw leaving? Jack nodded, filling her in on Victor's unexpected visit and invitation. Emily's brow furrowed. This doesn't feel right, Jack. Why the sudden change of heart? I don't know, Jack admitted. But I think I have to go. Maybe he's genuinely had a change of heart. Emily looked skeptical but nodded. Just be careful, Jack. And remember, you have the truth on your side now. As evening approached, Jack found himself standing before the imposing gates of Blackwell Manor. He felt out of place in his best flannel shirt and freshly pressed jeans, a far cry from the opulent surroundings. The butler who answered the door looked down his nose at Jack. Mr. Thornton, I presume. This way, please. Jack was led through a maze of richly decorated rooms, each more extravagant than the last. Finally, he was ushered into a study where Victor sat behind an enormous mahogany desk. Ah, Jack. Right on time. Please, have a seat. Victor gestured to a plush leather chair. As Jack sat down, feeling the soft leather beneath him, he couldn't help but think of his own worn kitchen chairs back home. The contrast was stark, a physical reminder of the vast gulf between their worlds. Victor leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Now, Jack, I've been thinking about our little disagreement. And I've come to realize that perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. Jack remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You see, Victor continued, I admire your spirit. That tenacity, that unwillingness to give up, it's admirable, really. In fact, I think we could use someone like you on our team. Jack's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Your team? Victor nodded, a sly smile playing on his lips. The Blackwell Resort Project. I'm offering you a position, Jack. A chance to be part of something bigger than your little farm. We'll compensate you handsomely for your land, of course. And you'll have a cushy job overseeing the resort's gardens. What do you say? For a moment, Jack was tempted. The offer of financial security, of respect from those who had laughed at him, was alluring. But then he thought of his father, and his father before him, working this land. He thought of Emily's discovery, of the trust placed in his family generations ago. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell, Jack said, his voice firm. But my farm isn't for sale. Not at any price. Victor's friendly demeanor vanished in an instant. His eyes turned cold, his voice hard as steel. I was afraid you might say that, Jack. I had hoped we could do this the easy way. He pressed a button on his desk, and the study door opened. In walked Brad, Victor's son, followed by 2 burly men Jack recognized as local troublemakers often in Victor's employ. You see, Jack, Victor continued, leaning back in his chair, I know about your little discovery. Did you really think you could keep something like that from me? This town doesn't sneeze without my knowing about it. Jack's blood ran cold. How could Victor know? As if reading his mind, Victor smirked. Oh, don't look so surprised. That mousy little librarian isn't as clever as she thinks. My son overheard her talking to you at the general store. It wasn't hard to put the pieces together. Brad stepped forward, a malicious grin on his face. Yeah, Jack. Did you really think you could outsmart us? You're nothing but a dirty farmer. Always have been, always will be. Jack stood up, his heart pounding. Those documents are real, Victor. You can't just make them disappear. Victor's laugh was cold and mirthless. Can't I? You'd be surprised what money and influence can do, Jack. By this time tomorrow, those documents will be nothing but ashes. And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, well. He nodded to the two men flanking Brad. Let's just say accidents happen on farms all the time. Jack's mind raced. He had to get out of there, had to warn Emily. But as he turned to leave, Brad blocked his path. Not so fast, farmer boy, Brad sneered. I think it's time we taught you a lesson about respecting your betters. What happened next was a blur of pain and confusion. Jack found himself being roughed up, thrown to the ground, kicks and punches raining down on him. Through the haze of pain, he heard Victor's voice, cold and distant. Remember this, Jack. You're nothing in this town. Nothing but dirt beneath our shoes. When it was over, Jack found himself dumped unceremoniously at the edge of his property, battered and bruised. As he limped towards his house, he saw a figure running towards him, Emily. Oh my God, Jack! What happened? She helped him inside, her face a mask of concern and anger. As Emily tended to his wounds, Jack filled her in on what had transpired at Blackwell Manor. Emily's eyes widened in shock and then narrowed in determination. We can't let them get away with this, Jack, she said fiercely. We have to fight back. Jack winced as she dabbed at a cut on his forehead. How, Emily? Victor's right. He owns this town. Who's going to believe us over him? Emily took Jack's hand in hers, her touch sending an unexpected warmth through him despite his pain. We'll make them believe, Jack. The truth has a way of coming out. We just need to be smart about it. As they sat there, in Jack's humble kitchen, a plan began to form. They would need allies, evidence, and above all, courage. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But as Jack looked into Emily's determined eyes, he felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Little did they know that their fight for justice was about to uncover secrets far deeper and more shocking than either of them could have imagined. Secrets that would shake Millbrook to its very foundations and forever change the lives of everyone in town. Meanwhile, across town, in the darkened study of Blackwell Manor, Victor poured himself a generous glass of whiskey, his hand shaking slightly. He opened a hidden safe behind a painting and pulled out a yellowed envelope, its contents known only to him. As he stared at it, a mix of fear and determination crossed his face. No, he muttered to himself. I've come too far. Sacrificed too much. I won't let some dirt-poor farmer and a nosy librarian ruin everything. He tossed the envelope into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed it. But as the paper curled and blackened, Victor couldn't shake the feeling that he had just lit a fuse that would eventually blow his carefully constructed world apart. As dawn broke over Millbrook the next day, the stage was set for a battle that would test the very soul of the town. Jack Thornton, the humble farmer who had been laughed at and beaten down, was about to discover reserves of strength he never knew he possessed. And Emily Carter, the quiet librarian, would soon find herself at the center of a storm that had been brewing for generations. The seeds of revolution had been planted in the fertile soil of injustice. Now, it was only a matter of time before they would burst forth, changing the landscape of Millbrook forever. In the days that followed, Jack and Emily worked tirelessly to gather evidence and build their case. They pored over old town records, interviewed elderly residents who might remember stories passed down about the town's founding, and discreetly reached out to other farmers who stood to lose their land to Victor's resort project. Their efforts did not go unnoticed. Strange accidents began to plague Jack's farm, a mysterious fire in one of his barns, valuable equipment vandalized, and even his prized stallion was found injured in its stall. Each incident was a clear message from Victor: back off, or things will get worse. But rather than cow Jack into submission, these acts of intimidation only strengthened his resolve. With each new challenge, he found himself growing stronger, more determined. The timid farmer who had once shrunk from confrontation was slowly transforming into a leader, his quiet dignity inspiring others to stand with him. Emily, too, found herself changing. The shy librarian who had always found solace in books was now out in the community, rallying support and uncovering long-buried truths. She discovered a passion for justice that burned brighter than her fear of confrontation. As Jack and Emily's investigation deepened, they began to uncover a web of corruption that stretched back decades. Victor Blackwell's iron grip on Millbrook wasn't just about money and power, it was about keeping buried a secret so explosive it could destroy not just the Blackwell family, but the very foundations of the town itself. One evening, as Jack and Emily were working late in the library, poring over dusty old records, they made a startling discovery. Hidden in the back of an ancient ledger was a faded photograph that made both of them gasp in shock. The photo showed a group of men standing in front of Millbrook's old courthouse. In the center was a man who looked remarkably like Jack, his great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Thornton. But it was the man standing next to him that made their blood run cold. Though much younger, the face was unmistakable. It was Victor Blackwell. "How is this possible?" Jack whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "This photo must be over 100 years old. How could Victor be in it?" Emily's mind raced. Unless that's not Victor. Jack, what if that's Victor's grandfather? The resemblance is uncanny. As they studied the photo more closely, they noticed something else. Jeremiah Thornton and the Blackwell ancestor were shaking hands, but their expressions were grim, almost confrontational. And in the background, partially obscured by shadow, was a figure that sent a chill down their spines, a man in a dark suit, his face hidden, holding what looked like a gun. "My God," Emily breathed. "Jack, I think we've just stumbled onto the real story of Millbrook's founding. And I have a feeling it's nothing like what we've been told." As they left the library that night, neither Jack nor Emily noticed the figure watching them from the shadows. Brad Blackwell stepped out of his hiding place, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he pulled out his phone. "Dad," he said as soon as Victor answered. "You're not going to believe what I just overheard. We've got a big problem." The next morning, as Jack was tending to his crops, he was surprised to see a familiar face approaching across the fields. It was Sarah, Victor's wife, looking uncharacteristically disheveled and nervous. "Jack," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being followed. "I need to talk to you. It's about Victor and your family. There's something you need to know." As Sarah began to speak, Jack felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The story she told, a tale of betrayal, murder, and a century-old lie, would change everything. And as the truth came to light, the battle for Millbrook's soul would reach its explosive climax. The winds of change were blowing through Millbrook, carrying with them the scent of long-buried secrets and the promise of justice long denied. For Jack Thornton, the humble farmer who had been laughed at by the town's elite, the greatest challenge of his life was just beginning. But with Emily by his side and the truth as his weapon, he was ready to face whatever storms might come. Little did he know that the coming tempest would not only reshape Millbrook but would also open his heart to a love he never expected to find. The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Jack Thornton found himself sitting at his worn kitchen table, his mind reeling from Sarah Blackwell's revelation. Emily sat across from him, her face a mix of shock and determination as they processed the earth-shattering information. Sarah's words echoed in Jack's mind: your great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Thornton, and Victor's grandfather, Elias Blackwell, were once friends, partners in founding Millbrook. But greed and jealousy tore them apart. Elias, he killed Jeremiah, Jack. He murdered him and stole the land rights, fabricating the documents that have given the Blackwells power all these years. Jack's hands trembled as he clutched his coffee mug. I can't believe it, Emily. All this time, my family, we were robbed of our legacy. Emily reached across the table, her warm hand covering his. We have the truth now, Jack. And we're going to use it to set things right. As they sat there, the weight of history pressing down on them, neither noticed the growing warmth between them, the way their eyes lingered on each other a moment too long. In the midst of chaos, something beautiful was blossoming. Their moment was interrupted by a frantic knocking at the door. Jack opened it to find Sarah, her eyes wild with fear. You have to help me, she gasped, pushing past Jack into the house. Victor knows I came to see you. He's not the man I thought I married. The things he's done, the things he's planning to do. Emily guided Sarah to a chair, her librarian's instincts kicking in as she prepared to document every word. Start from the beginning, Sarah. Tell us everything. Over the next hour, Sarah spilled secrets that had been buried for generations. She spoke of hidden accounts, of bribes paid to local officials, and of a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Millbrook's borders. But most chilling of all was her revelation about Victor's plans for those who stood in his way. He's not just planning to discredit you, Jack, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. He wants to destroy you completely. And he's willing to do whatever it takes. Even murder. The room fell silent, the gravity of the situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. Jack's mind raced, thinking of all the accidents that had plagued his farm. How close had he come to becoming another victim in the Blackwells' long history of violence? Emily was the first to break the silence, her voice steady and determined. We need to take this to the authorities. With Sarah's testimony and the evidence we've gathered, we can bring Victor down. But Sarah shook her head, fear etched across her face. You don't understand. Victor has people everywhere, in the police, in the courts. If we go to the authorities, he'll know immediately. We'll be dead before we can testify. Jack stood up, pacing the small kitchen. Then what do? We can't just sit back and let him win. It was at that moment, as despair threatened to overwhelm them, that fate intervened in the most unexpected way. The sound of tires on gravel announced another visitor, and Jack opened the door to find an old man he'd never seen before standing on his porch. Jack Thornton? The man asked, his voice gravelly with age. My name is Harold Jenkins. I think it's time we had a talk about your great-great-grandfather. As Harold settled into Jack's living room, his roomy eyes taking in Sarah's presence with surprise, he began to unfold a tale that would change everything. I've been waiting a long time to tell this story, Harold began, his gnarled hands clutching a worn leather satchel. My grandfather was Jeremiah Thornton's best friend. He witnessed everything that happened between Jeremiah and Elias Blackwell. And he left behind proof that could bring down the entire Blackwell empire. From the satchel, Harold produced a stack of yellowed papers and a small, leather-bound journal. This is Jeremiah's personal journal, and these are the original land grants and agreements. My family has protected them for generations, waiting for the right time, for someone strong enough to stand up to the Blackwells. As Jack, Emily, and Sarah pored over the documents, the true history of Millbrook unfolded before them. Jeremiah Thornton had indeed been the town's founder, a visionary who dreamed of creating a community where everyone could prosper. Elias Blackwell had been his friend and partner, but ambition and greed had corrupted him. The journal entries painted a vivid picture of Elias's descent into darkness, the arguments, the threats, and finally, the fateful night when Jeremiah confronted Elias about his corrupt dealings. The final entry, written in a shaky hand, spoke of Jeremiah's fear for his life and his determination to expose the truth. He knew, Jack whispered, running his fingers over his ancestors' last words. He knew Elias was going to try to kill him. Harold nodded solemnly. And he did. My grandfather found Jeremiah's body, but by then, Elias had already put his plan into motion. He'd forged documents, bribed officials, and begun spreading the lie that would become Millbrook's official history. Emily, her librarian's mind racing, began connecting the dots. That's why the Blackwells have been so desperate to keep control of the town records. They've been protecting their lie for generations. Sarah, who had been silent throughout Harold's story, suddenly stood up. I have to go, she said, her voice shaking. Victor will be wondering where I am. If he suspects I've been talking to you. Jack moved to stop her, but Emily put a hand on his arm. Let her go, Jack. She's taking a huge risk just by being here. As Sarah hurried out, the weight of their newfound knowledge settled over the room. They had the truth now, but wielding it would be dangerous. Victor Blackwell wouldn't give up his power without a fight, and he had generations of corruption on his side. What do we do now? Jack asked, looking from Emily to Harold. It was Emily who answered, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. We fight, Jack. We use the truth to bring justice to Millbrook, once and for all. Over the next few days, Jack, Emily, and Harold worked tirelessly to build their case. They made copies of all the documents, hiding them in various locations around town. Emily used her librarian skills to authenticate the journal and papers, while Jack reached out to trusted friends among the local farmers, quietly building a network of support. But Victor Blackwell was not idle. Strange men began appearing around town, watching Jack's farm and the library. Emily's car was vandalized, a clear warning scrawled across the hood, "Keep your nose out of Blackwell business." The tension in Millbrook was palpable, like the charge in the air before a thunderstorm. Everyone could sense that something big was coming, even if they didn't know what. It all came to a head on a stormy night, 2 weeks after Harold's revelation. Jack was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. He rushed downstairs to find his kitchen window shattered and a brick lying on the floor, a note wrapped around it. With shaking hands, he unfolded the paper and read the chilling message, "Midnight. The old mill. Come alone or the librarian dies." Jack's heart raced as he reached for his phone to call Emily. But before he could dial, another sound froze him in place, a muffled scream from outside, followed by the squeal of tires. Without thinking, Jack raced out into the rain, just in time to see a black SUV speeding away down his driveway. In the back window, illuminated by a flash of lightning, he saw Emily's terrified face. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but Jack forced himself to think. He couldn't go to the police, Victor's influence ran too deep. But he couldn't face this alone either. With determination born of desperation, he dialed a number. "Harold? It's Jack. They've taken Emily. I need your help." As midnight approached, Jack stood in the shadow of the old mill, rain pouring down around him. The dilapidated building loomed against the stormy sky, a relic of Millbrook's past that now seemed a fitting stage for the climax of its long-buried secrets. "Jack Thornton." Victor's voice boomed out, amplified by the storm. I see you're as foolishly brave as your ancestor. Come inside, let's settle this like men. Taking a deep breath, Jack stepped into the mill. The interior was dimly lit by scattered lanterns, casting long shadows across rusted machinery. In the center of the room stood Victor Blackwell, flanked by his son Brad and two burly men. And there, tied to a chair with fear in her eyes, was Emily. "Let her go, Victor," Jack said, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is between you and me." Victor laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "Oh, Jack. You still don't get it, do you? This is about so much more than just you and me. This is about power, about legacy. Something a simple farmer like you could never understand." "I understand more than you think," Jack replied, taking a step forward. "I know the truth about Jeremiah Thornton and Elias Blackwell. I know about the murder, the lies, the generations of corruption." For a moment, surprise flickered across Victor's face, quickly replaced by rage. "You know nothing," he spat. "The Blackwells built this town. We made it what it is. And I'll be damned if I let some dirt-poor farmer and a nosy librarian destroy everything we've worked for." He nodded to one of his men, who raised a gun, pointing it at Emily's head. "Now, here's how this is going to work. You're going to sign over your farm to me, Jack. You're going to publicly retract any accusations you've made, and you're going to leave Millbrook forever. Do that, and the librarian lives." Jack's mind raced. He had to play for time, had to trust that Harold had understood his cryptic message and set their plan in motion. "And if I refuse?" he asked, stalling. Victor's smile was cold as ice. "Then you'll both die here, and the official story will be that you killed Emily in a jealous rage before taking your own life. Tragic, really. The town will mourn, and then they'll move on, right into the welcoming arms of the Blackwell Resort." "You're insane," Emily spat, struggling against her bonds. "You really think you can get away with this?" "My dear," Victor said, turning to her with mock pity, "we've been getting away with it for over a century. What makes you think this time will be any different?" But even as the words left his mouth, the sound of sirens filled the air. Victor's head snapped around, his composure cracking for the first time. "What did you do?" he snarled at Jack. Jack allowed himself a small smile. "I learned from you, Victor. Always have a backup plan." The mill erupted into chaos. Victor's men rushed to secure the exits, while Brad grabbed Emily, using her as a human shield. Victor himself pulled out a gun, training it on Jack. "You've signed your death warrant, Thornton," he growled. "When I'm done with you, there won't be enough left to bury." But before he could pull the trigger, a voice rang out from the shadows. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, darling." Everyone froze as Sarah Blackwell stepped into the light, a small handgun pointed steadily at her husband. Victor's eyes widened in disbelief. "Sarah? What the hell do you think you're doing?" "The right thing," she replied, her voice shaking but determined. "For once in my life, I'm doing the right thing." As if on cue, the doors of the mill burst open. But instead of the police Victor had expected, in poured a group of familiar faces, farmers, shopkeepers, and other townspeople, all armed with whatever weapons they could find. "It's over, Victor," Jack said, stepping forward. "The whole town knows the truth now. Harold's been spreading the word, showing people the evidence. Your empire is finished." Victor's face contorted with rage. With a roar of fury, he swung his gun towards Jack, finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, two shots rang out in quick succession. Victor stumbled, a look of shock on his face as he fell to his knees. Sarah stood over him, her gun still smoking, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "But I couldn't let you hurt anyone else." As Victor collapsed, the fight seemed to go out of Brad and the other men. They surrendered without further resistance, and Emily was quickly untied. She rushed into Jack's arms, clinging to him tightly. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I never doubted you for a second." Jack held her close, his heart pounding with relief and something else, something he was only now allowing himself to acknowledge. "I'll always come for you, Emily," he murmured. "Always." As the sound of police sirens grew closer, Jack looked around at the gathered townspeople, his friends and neighbors who had rallied to his cause. In their faces, he saw shock, relief, and a dawning realization of how close they had come to losing everything. The old mill, which had stood witness to the birth of Millbrook's great lie, now saw the beginning of its rebirth. As the truth came to light and justice was served, the town would have to grapple with its past and find a way to move forward. But that was a challenge for another day. For now, as the storm outside began to subside and the first rays of dawn peeked through the mill's broken windows, Jack Thornton, the humble farmer who had been laughed at by the town's elite, stood tall. With Emily by his side and the support of his community behind him, he was ready to help write the next chapter in Millbrook's history. Little did he know that the greatest challenges and the greatest joys still lay ahead. For in the aftermath of that fateful night, Millbrook would be transformed in ways no one could have predicted, and Jack would discover strengths within himself he never knew he possessed. As the police cars pulled up and the townspeople began to give their statements, Jack and Emily shared a look of understanding. Their journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The dawn broke over Millbrook, washing the town in a new light. And as Jack Thornton stood in the doorway of the old mill, Emily's hand clasped tightly in his, he felt a sense of hope and possibility that he hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be trials to face, wounds to heal, and a community to rebuild. But for the first time in generations, that path was illuminated by the light of truth and justice. As Jack looked out over the town he loved, he made a silent promise to Jeremiah, to Emily, to himself, and to all of Millbrook. He would help guide them into this new era with honesty, compassion, and the unwavering determination that had seen him through the darkest of times. The humble farmer who had once been laughed at by the town's elite now stood as a beacon of hope for a brighter future. And as he squeezed Emily's hand, feeling her warmth and strength beside him, Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would never have to face them alone. The story of Millbrook and of Jack Thornton was far from over. In fact, the most exciting chapter was just about to begin. The weeks following the dramatic showdown at the old mill were a whirlwind of activity for Millbrook and its residents. As the dust settled and the full extent of the Blackwell family's corruption came to light, the town found itself grappling with its past and uncertainly facing its future. Jack Thornton, once the laughingstock of Millbrook's elite, now found himself thrust into a leadership role he never expected. The humble farmer who had stood up to injustice had become a symbol of hope and integrity for a community in desperate need of both. Early one morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Jack stood on his porch, nursing a cup of coffee. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders, but there was a newfound strength in his stance, a quiet confidence that had been forged in the fires of adversity. "Penny for your thoughts," came a soft voice from behind him. Emily stepped out onto the porch, her presence bringing a warmth that had nothing to do with the rising sun. Jack smiled, handing her a steaming mug. "Just thinking about how much has changed. A month ago, I was just a farmer trying to save his land. Now you're the man who saved an entire town," Emily finished, her eyes shining with admiration and something deeper, something neither of them had yet put into words. Jack shook his head, a wry smile on his lips. "I didn't do it alone. You, Harold, Sarah, even the townspeople who stood up when it mattered most. We did this together." As they stood there, watching the town come to life in the distance, Jack couldn't help but marvel at how his relationship with Emily had deepened. In the chaos of the past weeks, they had been each other's rock, finding strength and comfort in stolen moments between meetings and late-night strategy sessions. But there was no time to dwell on personal feelings. The day ahead promised to be a challenging one. The town council was meeting to discuss Millbrook's future, and as the newly appointed interim mayor, a position Jack had reluctantly accepted at the town's insistence, he would be at the center of it all. The council chambers were packed when Jack arrived, Emily by his side in her role as head of the newly formed Truth and Reconciliation Committee. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Old grudges and new alliances simmered just beneath the surface as Jack took his place at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "we're here today to begin the process of rebuilding Millbrook. Not just our infrastructure or our economy, but the very fabric of our community. The trust that was broken, the wounds that were inflicted, it's time to start healing." As Jack outlined his vision for a transparent government and community-driven development, he could see the mixture of hope and skepticism on the faces before him. Change wouldn't come easy, especially for those who had benefited from the old system. "Mr. Mayor," came a sharp voice from the back. It was Gerald Hawkins, owner of the local bank and a longtime Blackwell ally. "This all sounds very noble, but let's be realistic. The Blackwell Resort project would have brought jobs and revenue to Millbrook. Without it, how do you propose to keep this town afloat?" Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself. This was the moment he'd been preparing for. "I'm glad you asked that, Mr. Hawkins. Because I believe the answer lies not in one big project, but in the strength and diversity of our community." With that, Jack unveiled his plan, a series of small business initiatives, agricultural co-ops, and ecotourism projects that would leverage Millbrook's natural beauty and the skills of its residents. It was a bold vision, one that would require everyone to work together in ways they never had before. "It won't be easy," Jack admitted, "but I believe in this town. I believe in all of you. Together, we can build something even better than what we had before, something that benefits everyone, not just a select few." As the meeting progressed, Jack could see the tide of opinions slowly turning. Even some of his former critics were nodding along, caught up in the possibilities. But he knew the real challenges lay ahead. Words were one thing, action would be quite another. As the council filed out, Emily squeezed Jack's hand. "You did great," she whispered. "They're starting to believe." But before Jack could respond, a commotion at the back of the room caught their attention. Sarah Blackwell, looking pale and drawn, was making her way towards them, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her. "Jack, Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you. Privately. There's something you need to know." The gravity in her tone sent a chill down Jack's spine. Just when he thought the storms had passed, it seemed another was brewing on the horizon. In the privacy of the mayor's office, a room Jack was still getting used to, Sarah sank into a chair, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. "I've been going through Victor's papers," she began, her voice unsteady. "Trying to make sense of everything, to understand how deep the corruption went. And I found something that changes everything." With shaking hands, she pulled out a worn leather journal. This was Elias Blackwell's personal diary. Victor kept it hidden all these years. "And Jack, it mentions your great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Thornton." Jack leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What does it say?" Sarah took a deep breath. According to this, Jeremiah and Elias were more than just business partners. They were half-brothers. The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the desk for support. That's impossible," he stammered. But even as he said it, pieces began falling into place in his mind. The old photograph they'd found, the intensity of the feud that had torn Millbrook apart, it all took on a new, more personal dimension. Emily, ever the voice of reason, spoke up. "Sarah, are you sure about this? The implications." Sarah nodded solemnly. "I've read it a dozen times. Elias writes about their shared father, about growing up knowing he had a brother but never being allowed to acknowledge him. It seems the truth about their relationship was the real reason behind the murder, not just greed or power." As the weight of this new information settled over them, Jack felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet once again. Everything he thought he knew about his family history, about the very foundations of Millbrook, was being rewritten. "We need to verify this," Emily said, her librarian's instincts kicking in. "If it's true, it could change how we approach the whole reconciliation process." Jack nodded, still trying to process the revelation. "You're right. But we need to be careful how we handle this information. If it gets out before we're ready." The implications hung heavy in the air. The people of Millbrook were just beginning to heal, to trust in their new leadership. News of this familial connection between the Thorntons and the Blackwells could shatter that fragile peace. As they discussed how to proceed, a knock at the door interrupted them. It was Harold Jenkins, looking grave. "Jack, you need to come quickly. There's trouble at the old Blackwell estate." Racing across town, Jack's mind whirled with possibilities. Had Victor somehow escaped custody? Was this some last-ditch effort by Blackwell loyalists to reclaim power? But the scene that greeted them at the sprawling Blackwell mansion was something none of them could have predicted. A crowd had gathered, their angry shouts carrying on the wind. And there, chained to the ornate front gates, was Brad Blackwell. "What the hell is going on?" Jack demanded, pushing his way through the crowd. Brad looked up, his face a mask of defiance despite the fear in his eyes. "I'm not leaving," he shouted. "This is my home, my legacy. You can't take it away from me." Jack felt a surge of pity for the young man. For all his arrogance and cruelty, Brad was also a victim, a product of generations of lies and corruption. "Brad," Jack said, keeping his voice calm, "nobody's trying to take your home. But you need to understand, things are different now. We need to work together to make things right." "Right?" Brad spat. "What's right about taking everything my family built? We made this town." An angry murmur ran through the crowd. Jack could feel the situation teetering on the edge of violence. He had to defuse it, and fast. Taking a deep breath, Jack turned to address the gathered townspeople. "Listen to me, all of you. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. The Blackwells hurt this town, hurt all of us. But this," he gestured to Brad, chained and desperate, "this isn't justice. It's revenge. And if we go down that road, we're no better than those who wronged us." A hush fell over the crowd as Jack's words sank in. He could see the conflict on their faces, the battle between anger and the desire to be better. "We have a chance here," Jack continued, his voice gaining strength. "A chance to build something new, something better. But we can only do that if we work together. All of us. Even those who were on the wrong side before." He turned back to Brad, extending a hand. "What do you say, Brad? Are you willing to be part of building a better Millbrook? To use your skills and knowledge to help, instead of harm?" For a long moment, Brad stared at Jack's outstretched hand, conflict clear on his face. Then, slowly, he nodded. I don't know how," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to try." As Jack helped unlock the chains, he could feel a shift in the energy of the crowd. The anger was still there, but it was tempered now by something else, a cautious hope, a willingness to believe in the possibility of change. Later that evening, as Jack sat on his porch, replaying the day's events in his mind, Emily joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out over Millbrook. "You did good today," Emily said finally, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You're bringing this town together in a way I never thought possible." Jack squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her presence. "I couldn't do any of this without you, you know. Your strength, your wisdom. Emily, But before he could finish, a car came roaring up the driveway, headlights cutting through the night. Harold Jenkins leapt out, waving a stack of papers. "Jack! Emily! You're not going to believe what I found in the old town archives." As Harold spread the documents out on the porch, explaining his latest discovery with breathless excitement, Jack and Emily shared a look. Whatever Harold had uncovered, whatever new challenge it presented, they would face it together. The story of Millbrook was far from over. The revelation of Jack and Brad's shared ancestry, the ongoing process of healing and reconciliation, the challenge of building a new economy, all of these threads were weaving together into a tapestry more complex and beautiful than anyone could have imagined. And at the center of it all stood Jack Thornton, the humble farmer who had become so much more. With Emily by his side and the support of a town rediscovering its true strength, he was ready to face whatever the future might bring. As the night deepened and Harold's explanations grew more animated, Jack allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought of Jeremiah Thornton and Elias Blackwell, half-brothers torn apart by secrets and societal expectations. He thought of Victor Blackwell, so consumed by the need to protect his family's ill-gotten legacy that he'd lost sight of what truly mattered. And he thought of himself, Jack Thornton, once ridiculed and dismissed, now standing at the crossroads of Millbrook's past and future. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but for the first time in his life, Jack felt truly equal to the task before him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and new opportunities to heal the wounds of the past. But for tonight, surrounded by friends and buoyed by the love he saw shining in Emily's eyes, Jack allowed himself to simply be grateful. The humble farmer had found his voice, his purpose, and his place in the world. And though the road ahead was long and uncertain, Jack Thornton was ready to walk it, one step at a time, with hope in his heart and the strength of his community behind him. As Harold's excited voice filled the night air and Emily's hand remained warmly clasped in his, Jack smiled. The story of Millbrook and of the Thornton legacy was far from over. In fact, the most exciting chapters were yet to be written. And Jack, once the laughingstock of the town's elite, now stood ready to be the author of Millbrook's brighter future. With truth as his pen and justice as his ink, he would help write a new story for the town he loved, a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the transformative power of community. The night stretched on, full of possibilities and promise. And in the heart of Millbrook, a new day was dawning, not just for Jack Thornton, but for every soul who called this resilient little town home. As the golden hues of autumn began to paint Millbrook in warm colors, the town found itself in the midst of a transformation. The changes that Jack Thornton had set in motion were beginning to take root, but with growth came new challenges, unexpected twists, and the ever-present shadow of the past. Jack stood at the edge of his cornfield, watching as a group of volunteers helped with the harvest. Among them, somewhat awkwardly wielding a pitchfork, was Brad Blackwell. The sight still felt surreal to Jack, his former tormentor now working alongside him, trying to find redemption through honest labor. "Never thought I'd see the day," came Emily's voice from behind him. She handed Jack a steaming mug of coffee, her fingers lingering on his as their hands met. Jack smiled, the simple touch sending a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the beverage. "It's not been easy for him," he admitted. "But he's trying. That's got to count for something." As they watched Brad fumble with a particularly stubborn ear of corn, Jack couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn of events that had led them to this point. The revelation of their shared ancestry had initially threatened to tear the fragile peace apart. But somehow, through countless late-night discussions, town hall meetings, and one particularly cathartic shouting match in the middle of Main Street, they had found a way forward. Brad, stripped of his family's wealth and influence, had been forced to confront the reality of his actions and the legacy he had inherited. It had been a painful process, marked by denial, anger, and finally, a grudging acceptance. Now, he was taking his first tentative steps towards becoming a contributing member of the community he had once looked down upon. But not everyone in Millbrook was as willing to embrace change. As Jack and Emily made their way into town for the weekly council meeting, they could feel the undercurrent of tension that still ran through the community. The town hall was packed as usual, but today there was an extra charge in the air. Jack knew why. Today was the day they would be discussing the fate of the Blackwell estate. As he called the meeting to order, Jack could see the divide in the room. On one side sat those who supported his vision of turning the sprawling mansion and its grounds into a community center and public park. On the other were those who still clung to the old ways, arguing that the property should be sold to the highest bidder to bring revenue into the town. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jack began, his voice carrying across the murmuring crowd, "I know this is a contentious issue. The Blackwell estate represents different things to different people. For some, it's a symbol of oppression and corruption. For others, it's a piece of our town's history, for better or worse." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I believe we have an opportunity here. An opportunity to take something that was built on greed and turn it into a force for good in our community." As Jack outlined his plan, using the mansion as a museum to house the true history of Millbrook, converting the grounds into public gardens and recreational spaces, and using the outbuildings for vocational training programs, he could see the skepticism on some faces slowly giving way to interest. But just as it seemed the tide was turning in his favor, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "And who's going to pay for all this, Mr. Mayor? Our taxes are high enough as it is." The speaker was Frank Holloway, owner of the local hardware store and a vocal critic of Jack's administration. His question opened the floodgates, and soon the room was filled with heated debate. Jack raised his hands, trying to restore order. "I understand your concerns," he said once the noise had died down. "That's why we've been working on a plan to make this project self-sustaining." He nodded to Emily, who stood and began distributing packets to the council members. "We've secured grants for the initial renovation," she explained. "And we've developed a business plan that will generate revenue through events, educational programs, and partnerships with local businesses." As the council pored over the documents, Jack held his breath. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of months of hard work and planning. If they could get this approved, it would be a major step towards healing the wounds of the past and building a better future for Millbrook. The debate raged on for hours, with passionate arguments on both sides. Jack found himself constantly mediating, trying to find common ground between opposing viewpoints. It was exhausting work, but he could feel the energy in the room slowly shifting. Finally, as the sun was setting outside, casting long shadows through the windows of the town hall, Jack called for a vote. The room fell silent as hands were raised, first for, then against. When the final tally was announced, Jack felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. By a narrow margin, the proposal had passed. The Blackwell estate would become a symbol of Millbrook's renewal, not its oppression. As the meeting adjourned and people began filing out, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Sarah Blackwell standing there, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving my family's legacy a chance at redemption." Jack nodded, words failing him in the face of her raw emotion. As Sarah left, Emily came to his side, slipping her hand into his. "You did it, Jack," she said, her voice filled with pride. But before Jack could respond, a commotion at the door caught their attention. Harold Jenkins burst in, his face pale with shock. "Jack! Emily! You need to come quickly. There's been a fire at the old mill." The next few hours passed in a blur of smoke, sirens, and barely contained panic. The old mill, which had stood as a silent witness to so much of Millbrook's history, was now a raging inferno. As fire trucks from neighboring towns joined the effort to contain the blaze, Jack worked tirelessly to coordinate the response and ensure everyone's safety. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning, as the last embers were finally extinguished, that the full extent of the damage became clear. The mill was a total loss, reduced to a smoldering skeleton of its former self. As Jack stood surveying the destruction, he felt a presence at his side. It was Chief Roberts of the fire department, his face grim in the pre-dawn light. "It wasn't an accident, Jack," he said quietly. "We found evidence of accelerants. Someone did this deliberately." The news hit Jack like a physical blow. Just when it seemed Millbrook was turning a corner, just when hope was beginning to take root, this happened. Was it someone opposed to the changes he was making? A final act of vengeance from a Blackwell loyalist? Or something else entirely? As the sun rose over the charred remains of the mill, Jack felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him more heavily than ever before. This wasn't just an attack on a building, it was an attack on the very spirit of renewal that had been growing in Millbrook. In the days that followed, as the investigation into the fire began and rumors swirled through the town, Jack found himself facing his greatest challenge yet. The fragile trust he had built, the coalitions he had formed, all of it was threatened by this act of violence. Some pointed fingers at Brad Blackwell, arguing that his apparent reformation was just an act. Others blamed outsiders, claiming that rival towns were jealous of Millbrook's progress. And a vocal minority even suggested that Jack himself might be behind it, a desperate move to rally support for his initiatives. Through it all, Jack worked tirelessly to keep the peace and push the investigation forward. But with each passing day, with each dead end and false lead, he could feel the town's frustration growing. It all came to a head one stormy evening, a week after the fire. Jack was working late in his office, poring over reports and trying to make sense of the conflicting information, when a rock came crashing through his window. Startled, he rushed to the broken window just in time to see a group of figures running away in the rain. At his feet lay the rock, a note wrapped around it. With shaking hands, Jack unfolded the paper and read the message scrawled in angry red letters: "Resign now or the next fire won't be so easy to put out." As Jack stood there, rain blowing in through the shattered window and soaking the papers on his desk, he felt a moment of despair. Had it all been for nothing? Was Millbrook doomed to be torn apart by its past, no matter how hard they tried to move forward? But then, through the sound of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder, he heard something else: voices, growing louder as they approached the town hall. Peering out into the stormy night, Jack saw a sight that made his heart swell. Coming down Main Street was a crowd of people, braving the elements, many carrying candles protected from the rain by cupped hands. At their head was Emily, her face set in determined lines as she led the impromptu march. As they gathered in front of the town hall, Emily's voice rang out clear and strong. "We are Millbrook," she shouted, and the crowd took up the chant. "We are Millbrook! We are Millbrook!" Jack rushed down to join them, his spirit lifting with each step. As he emerged from the building, the crowd parted to let him through. Emily reached out, taking his hand and pulling him to the center of the gathering. "Jack Thornton is not alone," she declared, her voice carrying over the storm. "We stand with him. We stand for a Millbrook that faces its problems together, that doesn't let fear or hate divide us." One by one, people began to step forward, adding their voices to Emily's. Old-timers who had initially resisted change, newcomers who had found a home in Millbrook's welcoming spirit, even Brad Blackwell, his face a mixture of shame and determination. As Jack looked out over the sea of faces, illuminated by candlelight and resolve, he felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. This was the true spirit of Millbrook, not the corruption of the past or the fear of the present, but the unwavering hope for a better future. Taking a deep breath, Jack raised his voice to be heard over the storm. "Thank you," he said, emotion making his voice rough. "Thank you for reminding me what we're fighting for. Millbrook isn't just a place, it's all of you. And together, there's nothing we can't overcome." A cheer went up from the crowd, drowning out the thunder. And in that moment, as the rain began to let up and the first stars peeked through breaks in the clouds, Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, Millbrook would face them united. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had washed away more than just the physical debris. Jack arrived at his office early, determined to get a fresh start on the investigation. But as he approached the town hall, he saw a figure waiting for him on the steps. It was Frank Holloway, the hardware store owner who had been one of his most vocal critics. Jack steeled himself for another confrontation, but as he drew closer, he saw something unexpected in Frank's eyes: respect and a hint of shame. "Mr. Mayor," Frank began, his gruff voice unusually subdued. I owe you an apology. I've been so caught up in my own fears about change that I couldn't see the good you've been doing for this town. Last night, well, it opened my eyes." Jack was stunned. He had never expected this from Frank, of all people. "Thank you, Frank," he said, extending his hand. "Your support means more than you know." As they shook hands, Frank cleared his throat awkwardly. "There's something else," he said. "Something I should have told you sooner. The night of the fire. I saw something." Jack's heart raced as Frank recounted what he had witnessed: a car he didn't recognize, parked near the old mill just before the fire started. A man getting out, carrying something. Frank had dismissed it at the time, but now. It wasn't much, but it was the first real lead they'd had. As Jack thanked Frank and rushed inside to share the information with the investigation team, he felt a renewed sense of hope. They would solve this mystery, and Millbrook would emerge stronger for it. Little did Jack know that this small piece of information would set in motion a chain of events that would not only reveal the truth about the fire, but would uncover secrets that had been buried for generations. Secrets that would shake Millbrook to its very foundations and test the bonds of community in ways no one could have imagined. As Jack settled into his office, ready to face whatever the day might bring, he glanced at the photo on his desk, a picture of himself and Emily, taken at the Harvest Festival just a few weeks ago. Their smiles were radiant, full of hope and possibility. Looking at Emily's face, Jack felt a surge of emotion. Through all the trials and tribulations, she had been his rock, his compass. And he knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that his feelings for her had grown into something deep and unshakable. But there would be time for that later. For now, there was work to be done. A mystery to solve, a town to heal, a future to build. Jack Thornton, the humble farmer who had been laughed at by the town's elite, squared his shoulders and turned to face the new day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to meet them head-on. For himself, for Emily, and for the town he had come to love more than he ever thought possible. The story of Millbrook was far from over. In fact, the most dramatic chapters were yet to be written. And Jack, once an unlikely hero, now stood at the center of it all, ready to lead his community into a future bright with promise and possibility. The crisp air of late autumn filled Jack Thornton's lungs as he stood at the edge of his cornfield, watching the sun rise over Millbrook. So much had changed in the months since that fateful town meeting, yet the simple beauty of this view remained constant, a reminder of why he had fought so hard for this land and this community. The investigation into the mill fire had taken unexpected turns, leading them down paths that uncovered long-buried secrets and tested the newfound unity of the town. But through it all, Millbrook had stood strong, its people coming together in ways that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. As Jack made his way into town, he couldn't help but marvel at the transformations. The Blackwell estate, once a symbol of oppression, now bustled with activity. Children laughed in the public gardens, while inside the mansion, visitors explored exhibits detailing Millbrook's true history, the good and the bad, laid bare for all to see. But it was the old mill site that truly showcased the town's resilience. Where charred ruins had once stood, a new structure was rising, a community center that would serve as a hub for local businesses, educational programs, and social services. It was a phoenix rising from the ashes, a testament to Millbrook's unwavering spirit. As Jack approached the construction site, he saw a familiar figure overseeing the work. Brad Blackwell, his face smudged with dirt, was deep in conversation with the foreman. When he spotted Jack, he excused himself and walked over, a tentative smile on his face. "Morning, Jack," Brad said, extending his hand. "We're ahead of schedule. Should be ready for the grand opening next month." Jack shook Brad's hand, still marveling at how far they'd come. "Great work, Brad. This means a lot to the town, and to me." A shadow passed over Brad's face. "I know I can never fully make up for what my family did, but I'm trying. I want to be part of building something good here." Before Jack could respond, he heard his name being called. Turning, he saw Emily hurrying towards them, her face flushed with excitement. "Jack! Brad! You need to come to the library right away. Harold's found something big." Exchanging puzzled glances, Jack and Brad followed Emily through the bustling streets of Millbrook. As they walked, Jack couldn't help but notice the changes in the town. Where once there had been suspicious glares and whispered gossip, now there were friendly waves and open conversations. The healing process was far from over, but progress was undeniable. At the library, they found Harold Jenkins surrounded by stacks of old documents, his eyes wild with the thrill of discovery. "You're not going to believe this," he said as soon as they entered. "I've been going through some of the older records that were recovered from the Blackwell estate, and I found this." He held up a fragile, yellowed envelope. "It's a letter from Elias Blackwell to Jeremiah Thornton, dated just days before Jeremiah's death." With trembling hands, Jack took the envelope. As he read the faded words, his eyes widened in shock. This changes everything," he whispered. The letter revealed a truth more complex and heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Elias and Jeremiah, half-brothers torn apart by societal expectations and family secrets, had been working together in secret. Their grand plan was to use the Blackwell wealth and the Thornton land to create a truly egalitarian community, a Millbrook where everyone would have a chance to prosper. But someone had discovered their plan, someone who stood to lose power and influence if Millbrook became the beacon of equality that Elias and Jeremiah envisioned. The letter hinted at threats, at danger closing in. And it ended with a plea from Elias to Jeremiah: "If anything happens to me, brother, you must carry on our dream. Millbrook's future depends on it." As Jack finished reading, he looked up to see tears in Brad's eyes. "All this time," Brad said, his voice choked with emotion, "we thought our families were enemies. But they were partners, visionaries." Emily, ever the pragmatist, spoke up. "This is incredible, but what does it mean for us now? For Millbrook?" Jack stood, a new fire burning in his eyes. "It means we have a legacy to fulfill. Elias and Jeremiah's dream, it's not just history. It's our blueprint for the future." Over the next few weeks, as news of the letter spread through Millbrook, Jack found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Town hall meetings buzzed with excitement as people came together to reimagine their community in light of this new information. The revelation sparked a renewed interest in Millbrook's history, with residents digging through attics and old family albums, piecing together the true story of their town. Each new discovery seemed to strengthen the bonds between families once divided by old grudges and misunderstandings. But not everyone was thrilled with these developments. As Jack worked tirelessly to implement programs and initiatives inspired by Elias and Jeremiah's vision, he faced opposition from those who still clung to the old ways. Anonymous threats began to appear, notes left on his doorstep, whispered warnings in the grocery store. It all came to a head on the night before the grand opening of the new community center. Jack was working late in his office when he heard a noise downstairs. Cautiously, he made his way down to investigate, only to find himself face to face with a masked figure attempting to set fire to the building. In the struggle that ensued, Jack managed to unmask the intruder. To his shock, he found himself staring into the face of Gerald Hawkins, the bank owner who had been one of Victor Blackwell's closest allies. "Why?" Jack demanded, holding Gerald firmly as sirens wailed in the distance. "Why try to destroy everything we've built?" Gerald's face twisted with bitterness. "You don't understand. The old Millbrook, it worked for people like me. We had power, influence. This new Millbrook of yours, where do we fit in?" As the police led Gerald away, Jack felt a profound sadness. Even now, after everything they'd been through, there were still those who couldn't see beyond their own interests to the greater good of the community. But as he stood there, watching the flashing lights of the police cars fade into the distance, Jack felt a hand slip into his. He turned to see Emily, her eyes shining with a mixture of concern and pride. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Jack nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the depth of his feelings for her. In that moment, with the threat averted and the promise of a new day ahead, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. "Emily," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I love you. I think I've loved you since the moment you showed up at my farm with those dusty old documents. You've been my partner, my rock through all of this. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life building this dream with you, not just for Millbrook, but for us." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she pulled Jack close. "Oh, Jack," she whispered, "I thought you'd never ask. I love you too, you stubborn, wonderful man." As they sealed their declaration with a kiss, cheers erupted around them. They broke apart to find that a crowd had gathered, Brad, Harold, Sarah, and dozens of other Millbrook residents, all drawn by the commotion of Gerald's arrest. "Well," Brad said with a grin, "I guess we have two things to celebrate tomorrow." The next day dawned bright and clear, as if the weather itself was celebrating with Millbrook. The grand opening of the community center became a dual celebration of the town's renewal and of Jack and Emily's engagement. As Jack stood on the podium, preparing to give his speech, he looked out over the sea of faces before him. There was Brad, standing tall and proud next to Sarah, both of them finally at peace with their family's complex legacy. Harold was there, beaming with the joy of a man who had helped uncover a great truth. And all around them were the people of Millbrook, farmers and shopkeepers, teachers and students, old-timers and newcomers, all united in their vision for a better future. "Friends," Jack began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "we stand here today not just to open a building, but to open a new chapter in Millbrook's history. A chapter that, in many ways, began over 100 years ago with two brothers who dared to dream of a better world." He went on to recount the story of Elias and Jeremiah, of their vision for Millbrook and the forces that had conspired to keep that vision buried for so long. "But today," he continued, his voice swelling with emotion, "we have a chance to fulfill their dream. To create a Millbrook where everyone has a chance to prosper, where the bonds of community are stronger than any force that might try to divide us." As Jack spoke of the programs that would be housed in the new center, job training initiatives, small business incubators, educational workshops. He could see the excitement building in the crowd. This wasn't just a building, it was the physical embodiment of Millbrook's rebirth. And so, Jack said, reaching the end of his speech, as we cut this ribbon, let's remember that we're not just opening a community center. We're opening our hearts to a new way of living, of working together, of being neighbors in the truest sense of the word. This is Elias and Jeremiah's legacy, and now, it's ours to carry forward. With that, Jack turned to Emily, who stood beside him holding an oversized pair of scissors. Together, they cut the ribbon, and the crowd erupted into cheers. As people began to stream into the new building, Jack felt a tug on his sleeve. He turned to find an elderly woman he recognized as one of Millbrook's oldest residents. "You know, young man," she said, her eyes twinkling, "I remember my grandmother telling stories about the old days, about two men who wanted to make Millbrook into something special. For years, I thought they were just fairy tales. But now," she gestured at the bustling community center, "now I see that dreams really can come true if you've got the courage to fight for them." Jack smiled, deeply touched by her words. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means more than you know." As the day wore on and the celebration continued, Jack found moments to connect with the people who had been instrumental in Millbrook's transformation. He shared a quiet word of thanks with Brad, who had overcome so much to become a true ally. He hugged Harold, whose tireless research had uncovered the truth that set them all free. And he spent long moments with Emily, marveling at the journey that had brought them together and excited for the path that lay ahead. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Millbrook, Jack stood at the edge of the community center's new garden. From here, he could see all the way to his farm in the distance, the land that had been in his family for generations. Emily joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Penny for your thoughts, Mr. Mayor?" she asked teasingly. Jack chuckled, pulling her close. "Just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, I was just a farmer trying to save his land. Now you're the man who saved an entire town," Emily finished. "Who uncovered the truth and helped heal old wounds. Who brought people together and gave them hope for the future." Jack shook his head, humbled by her words. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "Every person in Millbrook played a part in this. We did it together." As they stood there, watching the lights come on in town as dusk fell, Jack felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, there would be challenges to face, old habits to overcome, new dreams to pursue. But he knew that whatever came their way, Millbrook would face it united. The humble farmer who had once been laughed at by the town's elite had found his true calling. In fighting for his land, he had discovered a purpose greater than himself. In uncovering the past, he had helped shape the future. And in opening his heart to his community, he had found a love deeper and more profound than he ever could have imagined. As night fell over Millbrook, stars twinkling in the vast sky above, Jack Thornton knew that this was just the beginning. The legacy of Elias and Jeremiah, of truth and reconciliation, of community and hope, it was now in the hands of every Millbrook resident. And together, they would write the next chapters of their town's story, one day at a time. Jack turned to Emily, his heart full of love and possibility. "Shall we go home?" he asked softly. Emily smiled, her eyes shining in the twilight. "We're already home, Jack. Millbrook is our home." Hand in hand, they walked back towards the celebration, towards their future, towards the dream they would build together, not just for themselves, but for every soul who called Millbrook home. And so, as the music and laughter from the community center drifted out into the night, Millbrook stood poised on the brink of a new era. An era built on the foundations of the past, but reaching boldly into the future. An era where a humble farmer's courage, a librarian's wisdom, and a community's unwavering spirit had transformed a town once divided by secrets and lies into a beacon of hope and unity. The story of Millbrook, of Jack and Emily, of the Thorntons and the Blackwells, of every resident who had played a part in this grand transformation, would be told for generations to come. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, of the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. But more than that, it was a story that was still being written, with each new day bringing fresh opportunities to build on the legacy of those who had come before. And as the stars twinkled overhead, as lovers whispered dreams to each other and children slept peacefully in their beds, Millbrook embraced its future, forever changed by the humble farmer who had dared to stand up, speak out, and lead his community into the light of a new dawn.